We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here.
This is Houston. Say again, please.
Houston, we've had a problem.
Hello and welcome to this video edition of Space Junk Podcast, which I believe we'll have to call Space Junk Vodcast. Who knows? The point is that I was meant to be in Vienna later this week for the UN Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space Legal Subcommittee meeting, which is just as nerdy as it sounds, where we were going to be discussing things like off-Earth mining and space debris and whether the treaties are still a thing. Spoiler alert, we think they are. But very sadly, due to the pandemic, the meeting has been cancelled for the first time in its 59-year history, which is very sad for me because as an Aussie, I love to get out and travel. But also very sad for many other people stuck around the world who are unhealthy at this point, so thoughts to them. But for those of us who are not yet unhealthy or do not expect to become so, but who are stuck in some form of self-isolation over the next couple of weeks and have all of our meetings cancelled, aka these space nerds out there, we thought it would be quite fun to get together and Skype and talk about space law. And as part of that, I've decided to kind of perform, if you like, I guess read. I've decided to read to you the text of all of the 5 major space treaties. So I will be doing that, and forgive the sound of traffic outside. Clearly not everyone has the self-isolation memo yet in Sydney. But I can assure you that we are doing our very best to hoard all of the toilet paper. You will have heard about this. No one really understands it, but for some reason, no one can get enough of the stuff in Sydney at least, and in other parts of Australia. I'm a PhD student at Sydney University. I'm in the School of History and Philosophy of Science, and I study the intersections between international law and international scientific activity, particularly in extreme locations, and it does not get more extreme than space. So for you today, I have the great joy of bringing you the Outer Space Treaty, the first major treaty, and really it laid the basis for a lot of international cooperation in space and also for the further treaties that came later. And it still continues to be just an astonishing achievement in its breadth and depth and all that it achieved. I am going to be reading this to you today, and then very shortly I will be hopping on Skype and chatting to some experts in the field over in Geneva, in London, in the US, and elsewhere in Australia, to discuss, what is it about it that is so good or so special, or why do we like it, or all sorts of things. Also, we just feel like hanging out and drinking, and we didn't get to do that in the Vienna pubs like we wanted to, so we're doing what we can, and we're making the best of the situation. So that brings me to the reading of the treaty. I'm going to begin with the resolution adopted by the General Assembly, which introduces this treaty, because I think it's good to give a bit of context, and also because I have no shortage of time, and why the hell not? Here we go. This is the resolution adopted by the General Assembly. Resolution 2222. This was at the 21st meeting. The Treaty on Principles Governing the Activities of States in the Exploration and Use of Outer Space, including the moon and other celestial bodies. And get used to hearing that phrase a lot. The General Assembly, having considered the report of the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space covering its work during 1966, and in particular, the work accomplished by the Legal Subcommittee during its 5th session, held at Geneva from the 12th of July to the 4th of August, and at New York from the 12th of September to the 16th of September, noting further the progress achieved through subsequent consultations among states members of the United Nations, reaffirming the importance of international cooperation in the field of activities in the peaceful exploration and use of outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, and the importance of developing the rule of law in this new area of human endeavour. 1. Commends the Treaty on Principles Governing the Activities of States in the Exploration and Use of Outer Space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, the text of which is annexed to the present resolution. 2. Requests the depository governments to open the treaty for signature and ratification at the earliest possible date. 3. Expresses its hope for the widest possible adherence to this treaty. And 4. Requests the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, A, to continue to work on the elaboration of an agreement on liability for damages caused by the launching of objects into outer space, and an agreement on assistance to and return of astronauts and space vehicles, which are on the agenda of the committee. B. To begin at the same time the study of questions relative to the definition of outer space and the utilization of outer space and celestial bodies, including the various implications of space communications. And C. To report on the progress of its work to the General Assembly at its 22nd session. This was at the 1499th plenary meeting on the 19th of December, 1966. So now we have the Outer Space Treaty of 1967 in the Annex, the Treaty on Principles Governing the Activities of States in the Exploration and Use of Outer Space, including the Moon and other celestial bodies. The states party to this treaty. Inspired by the great prospects opening up before mankind as a result of man's entry into outer space, recognizing the common interest of all mankind in the progress of the exploration and use of outer space for peaceful purposes, believing that the exploration and use of outer space should be carried on for the benefit of all peoples, irrespective of the degree of their economic or scientific development. Desiring to contribute to broad international cooperation in the scientific as well as the legal aspects of the exploration and use of outer space for peaceful purposes. Believing that such cooperation will contribute to the development of mutual understanding and to the strengthening of friendly relations between states and peoples. Recalling Resolution 1962 at the 18th meeting, entitled Declaration of Legal Principles Governing the Activities of States in the Exploration and Use of Outer Space, which was adopted unanimously by the United Nations General Assembly on the 13th of December 1963. Recalling Resolution 1884 at the 18th meeting, calling upon states to refrain from placing into orbit around the Earth any objects carrying nuclear weapons or any other kinds of weapons of mass destruction, or from installing such weapons on celestial bodies, which was adopted unanimously by the United Nations General Assembly on the 17th of October, 1963. Taking account of United Nations General Assembly Resolution 110 at the second meeting of 3rd of November, 1947, which condemned propaganda designed or likely to provoke or encourage any threat to the peace, breach of the peace, or act of aggression, and considering that the aforementioned resolution is applicable to outer space. Convinced that a treaty on principles governing the activities of states in the exploration and use of outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, will further the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations, have agreed on the following. Article 1. The exploration and use of outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, shall be carried out for the benefit and in the interests of all countries, irrespective of their degree of economic or scientific development, and shall be the province of all mankind. Outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, shall be free for exploration and use by all states, without discrimination of any kind, on a basis of equality and in accordance with international law, and there shall be free access to all areas of celestial bodies. There shall be freedom of scientific investigation in outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, and states shall facilitate and encourage international cooperation in such investigation. Article 2. Outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, is not subject to national appropriation by claim of sovereignty, by means of use or occupation, or by any other means. Article 3. States parties to the treaty shall carry on activities in the exploration and use of outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, in accordance with international law, including the Charter of the United Nations, in the interest of maintaining international peace and security and promoting international cooperation and understanding. Article 4. States parties to the treaty undertake not to place in orbit around the Earth any objects carrying nuclear weapons or any other kinds of weapons of mass destruction, install such weapons on celestial bodies, or station such weapons in outer space in any other manner. The moon and other celestial bodies shall be used by all states parties to the treaty exclusively for peaceful purposes. The establishment of military bases, installations, and fortifications, the testing of any type of weapons, and the conduct of military maneuvers on celestial bodies shall be forbidden. The use of military personnel for scientific research or for any other peaceful purposes shall not be prohibited. The use of any equipment or facility necessary for peaceful exploration on the moon or other celestial bodies shall also not be prohibited. Article 5. States parties to the treaty shall regard astronauts as envoys of mankind in outer space, and shall render to them all possible assistance in the event of accident, distress, or emergency landing on the territory of another state party or on the high seas. When astronauts make such a landing, they shall be safely and promptly returned to the state of registry of their space vehicle. In carrying on activities in outer space and on celestial bodies, the astronauts of one state party shall render all possible assistance to the astronauts of other states' parties. States parties to the treaty shall immediately inform the other states parties to the treaty, or the Secretary-General of the United Nations, of any phenomena they discover in outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, which could constitute a danger to the life or health of astronauts. Article 6. States parties to the treaty shall bear international responsibility for national activities in space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, whether such activities are carried on by governmental agencies or by non-governmental entities, and for assuring that national activities are carried out in conformity with the provisions set forth in the present treaty. The activities of non-governmental entities in outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, shall require authorization and continuing supervision by the appropriate state party to the treaty. When activities are carried on in outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, by an international organization, responsibility for compliance with this treaty shall be borne both by the international organization and by the states parties to the treaty participating in such organization. Article 7. Each state party to the treaty that launches or procures the launching of an object into outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, and each state party from whose territory or facility an object is launched, is internationally liable for damage to another state party to the treaty or to its natural or juridical persons by such object or its component parts on the Earth, in air, or in outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies. Article 8. A state party to the treaty on whose registry an object launched into outer space is carried shall retain jurisdiction and control over such object and over any personnel thereof, while in outer space or on a celestial body. Ownership of objects launched into outer space, including objects landed or constructed on a celestial body, and of their component parts, is not affected by their presence in outer space or on a celestial body or by their return to Earth. Such objects or component parts found beyond the limits of the state party to the treaty on whose registry they are carried shall be returned to that state party, which shall, upon request, furnish identifying data prior to their return. Article 9. In the exploration and use of outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, states parties to the treaty shall be guided by the principle of cooperation and mutual assistance, and shall conduct all their activities in outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, with due regard to the corresponding interests of all other states parties to the treaty. States parties to the treaty shall pursue studies of outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, and conduct exploration of them so as to avoid their harmful contamination, and also adverse changes in the environment of Earth resulting from the introduction of extraterrestrial matter and, where necessary, shall adopt appropriate measures for this purpose. A state party to the treaty, which has reason to believe that an activity or experiment planned by another state party in outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, would cause potentially harmful interference with activities in the peaceful exploration and use of outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, may request consultation concerning the activity or experiment. Article 10. In order to promote international cooperation in the exploration and use of outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, in conformity with the purposes of this treaty, the states parties to the treaty shall consider on a basis of equality any requests by other states parties to the treaty to be afforded an opportunity to observe the flight of space objects launched by those states. The nature of such an opportunity for observation and the conditions under which it could be afforded shall be determined by agreement between the states concerned. Article 11. In order to promote international cooperation in peaceful exploration and use of outer space, states parties to the treaty conducting activities in outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, agree to inform the Secretary-General of the United Nations, as well as the public and the international scientific community, to the greatest extent feasible and practicable, of the nature, conduct, locations, and results of such activities. On receiving the said information, the Secretary-General of the United Nations should be prepared to disseminate it immediately and effectively. Article 12. All stations, installations, equipment, and space vehicles on the moon and other celestial bodies shall be open to representatives of other states parties to the treaty on a basis of reciprocity. Such representatives shall give reasonable advance notice of a projected visit, in order that appropriate consultations may be held and that maximum precautions may be taken to assure safety and avoid interference with normal operations in the facility to be visited. Article 13. The provisions of this treaty shall apply to the activities of states parties to the treaty in the exploration and use of outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, whether such activities are carried on by a single state party to the treaty or jointly with other states, including cases where they are carried on within the framework of international intergovernmental organizations. Any practical questions arising in connection with the activities carried on by international intergovernmental organizations in the exploration and use of outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, shall be resolved by the states parties to the treaty, either with the appropriate international organization or with one or more states members of that international organization which are parties to this treaty. Article 14. This treaty shall be open to all states for signature. Any state which does not sign this treaty before its entry into force, in accordance with paragraph 3 of this article, may accede to it at any time. 2. This treaty shall be subject to ratification by signatory states. Instruments of ratification and instruments of accession shall be deposited with the governments of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, the Union of the Soviet Socialist Republics, and the United States of America, which are hereby designated the depository governments. 3. This treaty shall enter into force upon the deposit of instruments of ratification by 5 governments, including the governments designated as depository governments under this treaty. 4. For states whose instruments of ratification or accession are deposited subsequent to the entry into force of this treaty, it shall enter into force on the date of the deposit of their instruments of ratification or accession. 5. The depository governments shall promptly inform all signatory and acceding states of the date of each signature, the date of deposit of each instrument of ratification of and accession to this treaty, the date of entry into force, and other notices. 6. This treaty shall be registered by the depository governments pursuant to Article 102 of the Charter of the United Nations. Article 15. Any state party to the treaty may propose amendments to this treaty. Amendments shall enter into force for each state party to the treaty, accepting the amendments upon their acceptance by a majority of states parties to the treaty, and thereafter for each remaining state party to the treaty on the date of acceptance by it. Article 16. Any state party to the treaty may give notice of its withdrawal from the treaty 1 year after its entry into force by written notification to the depository governments. Such withdrawal shall take effect 1 year from the date of receipt of this notification. Article 17. This treaty, of which the English, Russian, French, Spanish, and Chinese texts are all equally authentic, shall be deposited in the archives of the depository governments. Duly certified copies of this treaty shall be transmitted by the depository governments to the governments of the signatory and acceding states. In witness whereof, the undersigned, duly authorised, have signed this treaty. Done in triplicate at the cities of London, Moscow, and Washington, the 27th day of January, 1967. And there we have it, the Outer Space Treaty of 1967, read in its entirety, including the preamble and resolution that introduces it. Well, that was a wild ride for me, and I hope that you enjoyed it. If you enjoyed this, which is concerning, and seek immediate medical attention for that, then you can check out my other work on Space Junk Podcast. That is, if you go to Spotify or Apple Podcasts or anywhere else and search up Space Junk Podcast, it's a little purple galaxy type logo. You can also find my stuff if you follow me on Twitter or Instagram, which is at Annie Handmer. Fair warning, I only got Instagram like at the end of last year because my tax accountant was saying that if I didn't have Instagram, I don't exist. So look, it's patchy, but we're learning, and I'm really happy to take any advice that anyone has. And you can also send me an email on thespacejunkpod@gmail.com or reach out in comments and messages and things like that. If you are a space lawyer or space nerd currently in self-isolation and you would like to be interviewed by me as part of this project, please send me an email or message. I already have loads of people all around the world lined up, ready to go, and we would love to have you too. And if you feel like you are not a space nerd or a space expert, well, I would say to you, you just sat through someone in Australia reading to you the entirety of the Outer Space Treaty, and that qualifies you to be a space nerd. So on that note, stay healthy, stay safe, stay inside, and stay nerdy. And I look forward to you joining me for our other treaties. Cheers.